In Coldwater Penitentiary, a black inmate was about to challenge the brutal order upheld by white prison guards. What started as a confiscated family photograph spiraled when Sergeant Ray Kincaid beat a young inmate nearly to death off the EO record behind a locked infirmary door. Malik Ramsey wasn't your typical wrongfully convicted inmate. For 7 years, he had endured Coldwater's cruelty and silence. Known for his calm intellect, underground influence, and an uncanny ability to stay one step ahead. When Kincaid ordered the savage assault on Jermaine Holloway, he had no idea he was messing with a professor-turned-prison strategist. Teach responded not with violence, but with a cold, calculated chain of events. Leaked footage, federal exposure, and a prisoner network that reached into every wing of the prison. What began as an abuse of power would become a reckoning broadcast to the nation. The walls of Coldwater would never forget the day Sergeant Kincaid found himself outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and begging for mercy in the very place he ruled by fear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sound arrived first, steel-toed boots clicking against concrete in perfect rhythm. Then came the jangling keys, each step punctuated by their metallic chatter. The inmates of D Block knew this cadence by heart. Some rolled to face the wall before the command came. Others stood at attention beside their bunks, eyes down, hands visible. It was 5:45 a.m. at Coldwater Penitentiary. Sergeant Ray Kincaid had arrived for morning inspection. "Look alive, gentlemen," Kincaid announced, voice cutting through the hushed quiet. His Mississippi drawl stretched "gentlemen" into something that sounded more like an accusation than a courtesy. "Random cell inspection. You know the drill." Kincaid stood 6'2", barrel-chested with 20 years of power etched into the lines around his eyes. His uniform was pressed to military precision, the silver badge on his chest polished to a mirror shine. Behind him trailed CO Dwight Merriman, Duke to the other guards, a fresh-faced recruit still learning the ropes, along with 2 other corrections officers who moved with practiced indifference. "Block D," Kincaid murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Always smells like something dying in Block D." He stopped before cell 217 and made a show of consulting his clipboard. "Mr. Washington, step out, hands on the wall." The inmate complied silently, his weathered face a practiced mask of neutrality. Kincaid signaled for the cell door to be opened, his mouth curling into what passed for a smile, but never reached. His eyes. "What we got today, Washington? Contraband, weapons." Kincaid entered the cell, methodically pulling apart the neatly made bed. "You boys always think you're so clever." "No, sir. Cell's clean," Washington replied, his voice carefully modulated to contain neither defiance nor submission. The razors, edge most black inmates at Coldwater, had learned to walk. Kincaid upended Washington's personal items, family photos, letters, a dog-eared Bible, onto the floor. Finding nothing of interest, he kicked the scattered belongings. "Clean it up," he ordered, stepping out. "And Washington, that shirt looks untucked to me. That's a code violation." Washington's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he remained silent. Everyone knew what Kincaid was doing. The shirt was perfectly tucked in. But contradiction meant the whole, and the whole meant hell. "Write him up, Duke," Kincaid instructed the younger guard, who hesitated just long enough for Kincaid to notice. "Problem, Merriman?" "No, Sergeant," Duke replied, scribbling on his notepad even as his eyes betrayed his discomfort. 3 cells. Down, Malik Ramsey observed the interaction silently from behind his copy of Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. At 42, Teach had the lean physique of a man who made calculated use of his yard time and the watchful eyes of someone who'd spent 7 years navigating Coldwater's treacherous currents. Before Coldwater, he'd been Dr. Ramsey, professor of African American history at Tougaloo College. Now he was inmate 45873, serving life for a murder conviction that had split the state along racial lines. What most guards didn't know, what Kincaid certainly didn't know, was that Teach had spent those 7 years building something, Not just muscle or survival skills, but a network. The Black Bloc, inmates called it in whispers. Not a gang, but something more organic. A community of protection and information that moved invisible beneath the official order of Coldwater. Kincaid continued down the row, his inspections growing increasingly invasive. When he reached cell 220, he paused again, consulting his clipboard with exaggerated scrutiny. Well, our newest guest, Holloway Jermaine. Lil Smoke. Kincaid savored the name, looking up at the young black man standing at attention. Transferred from North Region last week. Says here you've been keeping interesting company already. Jermaine Holloway stood ramrod straight, his youthful face, he couldn't be more than 20, tightly controlled. But Teach could see what Kincaid saw, the slight tremble in the boy's hands, the defiance simmering just beneath the surface. Hands on the wall, Smoke, Kincaid ordered. You familiar with Coldwater procedure yet? Yes, sir, Jermaine answered, placing his palms against the concrete. Kincaid entered the cell. From his vantage point, Teach watched as Kincaid systematically dismantled the young man's few possessions. Unlike with Washington, however, Kincaid seemed to be looking for something specific. What's this? Kincaid emerged holding a small, worn photograph. Girlfriend? Sister? Who's the pretty lady? Jermaine's shoulders tensed. My mother, sir. Kincaid studied the photo with exaggerated interest. Don't see the resemblance myself. Maybe you take after your daddy, assuming you know who that is. The collective tension in the block ratcheted up. Every inmate within earshot knew what was happening. Kincaid was fishing, looking for a reaction. Pushing until someone broke. It was a game he'd perfected over 20 years, and the rules were simple. He always won. I asked you a question, boy. Kincaid pressed when Jermaine remained silent. Yes, sir. I know who my father is, Jermaine replied, his voice tight as a wire. Kincaid slipped the photo into his pocket. Contraband. Photos have to be approved through proper channels. It was a lie. The photo had been processed through intake, and everyone knew it. That's my property, sir, Jermaine said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Kincaid's expression changed, the false civility evaporating. You challenging me, Smoke? The cell block went silent, the air suddenly electric. No, sir, Jermaine backpedaled, but it was too late. Turn around, Kincaid ordered. When Jermaine complied, Kincaid grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. When I take something, it's because it doesn't belong to you anymore. Understand? Teach closed his book quietly, setting it aside with deliberate care. I asked if you understand, Kincaid repeated, slamming Jermaine again, harder this time. Yes, sir, Jermaine gasped, blood beginning to trickle from his nose where it had struck concrete. Teach stood and took 3 measured steps to his cell door. Officer Merriman, he called, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. I believe I'm scheduled for library duty this morning. Will someone be escorting me at 6? It was a small intervention, indirect, but purposeful. Duke Merriman glanced over, visibly relieved at the distraction. Yes, Ramsey, we'll get to you. At 6. Kincaid turned, one hand still pressed against Jermaine's bleeding face. His eyes locked with Teach's for a moment, cold, calculating, suspicious. You got somewhere to be, Ramsey? Kincaid asked, loosening his grip on Jermaine slightly. Just clarifying my schedule, Sergeant, Teach answered calmly, his gaze steady. I understand how important proper procedure is at Coldwater. The subtext was clear to everyone present. Teach knew the rules, including the ones Kincaid was breaking. Kincaid's eyes narrowed, but he released Jermaine with a final shove. Get yourself cleaned up, he ordered the young man. And remember, at Coldwater, you're nothing but a number. He turned to leave, then added, Duke, make sure Ramsey gets to his library duty. Wouldn't want to interfere with a prisoner's rehabilitation. As Kincaid continued down the row, Duke lingered momentarily, watching as Jermaine wiped blood from his face with shaking hands. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, Duke's silent shame meeting Jermaine's silent fury, Before, the young guard hurried after his sergeant. Teach returned to his bunk, retrieving his book but no longer reading. Instead, he watched as the day room began to fill with inmates released for morning meal. His gaze caught that of Deshaun Brick Carver, a mountain of a man serving his 15th year. Brick nodded imperceptibly. Message received. The Black Bloc would convene tonight. Lieutenant Darla Reams sat ramrod straight in the warden's office, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform perfectly pressed. At 53, she'd been at Coldwater longer than almost anyone, working her way up from rookie CO to watch commander through 2 decades of careful political navigation. The incident reports from D Block are concerning, Lieutenant. Warden, Ellis Granger said, shuffling through papers on his mahogany desk. At 48, Granger looked more like a politician than a prison administrator. Tailored suit, carefully maintained salt and pepper beard, and the practiced smile of someone who'd made a career of reassuring others that everything was under control. 3 inmate complaints against Officer Kincaid in the past month. Inmates complain, Warden, Reams replied coolly. It's what they do. Granger leaned back in his leather chair. I'm well aware. But with the federal audit coming up next quarter, we need to ensure our house is in order. He tapped a folder emblazoned with the Department of Justice seal. The last thing Coldwater needs is federal oversight. The state contract is up for renewal and Meridian Corrections Corporation expects us to maintain our perfect record. Reams understood the subtext. Coldwater wasn't just a prison, it was a private enterprise, a profit center for Meridian. Federal oversight meant regulation. Regulation meant expense, and expense meant reduced dividends. Everyone got paid to keep the machine running smoothly, especially Granger, whose compensation package included company stock options. Kincaid is thorough, Reams said carefully. His block has the fewest incident reports, the lowest contraband, seizures, and the best compliance metrics in the facility. I don't particularly care how he achieves those results, Lieutenant, Granger replied, his voice dropping. But I do care that no evidence of his methods ever surfaces. Am I clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Granger closed the folder. The transfer from North Region Holloway. He's in D Block now? Yes, sir, under Kincaid's supervision. His file says he's connected to the Jackson Street disciples on the outside. Keep an eye on him. Last thing we need is gang recruitment inside Coldwater. Reams nodded. Kincaid is already managing the situation. Excellent. Granger stood, signaling the end of the meeting. One more thing, Lieutenant. That professor, Ramsey, any trouble there? Quiet as always, sir. Keeps to himself. Works in the library, takes his meals alone. Model prisoner. Granger smiled thinly. Let's keep it that way. His case got too much attention during the trial. We don't need him becoming some kind of cause, celebre behind bars. As Reams left the warden's office, she passed a framed mission statement on the wall. Coldwater Penitentiary, justice, rehabilitation, community safety. Below it hung Meridian Corrections Corporation's corporate slogan in smaller text, managing society's challenges, maximizing public value. She'd long since stopped seeing the words. In the prison library, Teach shelved books with careful precision, his movements economical and unobtrusive. The library was his domain, the one place in Coldwater where he could move relatively freely, interact with inmates from different blocks, and exchange information without arousing suspicion. He sensed someone approaching before he heard them. Duke Merriman stood awkwardly by the reference section, his youthful face troubled beneath his regulation haircut. Need something, Officer Merriman? Teach asked without looking up from his cart of books. Just checking security, Duke replied, the official reason for his presence. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice. That kid, Holloway, his face is pretty messed up. Teach continued shelving. Door frames in Coldwater seem particularly hazardous, men walking into them all the time. Duke shifted uncomfortably. Look, You don't what, Officer Merriman? Teach finally turned to face him fully. You don't approve? You don't participate? You don't speak up? Which one is it? Duke glanced around nervously. I've only been here 3 months. And how many more months until you become Kincaid? Teach asked, his voice still quiet but cutting. How many more bloodied faces before it stops bothering you altogether? Duke's expression hardened. You don't understand how things work here. I understand perfectly how things work here, Officer Merriman, Teach replied. The question is whether you do. He turned back to his cart. Orwell is in Section F, by the way. Animal Farm. Might be worth a read. Duke walked away without responding, his back stiff with indignation or shame, perhaps both. Later, as evening count approached, Teach made his way back to D Block. In the common area, he passed Jermaine Holloway sitting alone at a table, a purple bruise blooming across his cheekbone. Without breaking stride, Teach murmured, "Infirmary. Tomorrow, 9 a.m." Then he was passed, nothing in his demeanor indicating he'd spoken at all. In his cell, Teach sat on his bunk and reopened Baldwin's book, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking of the night 7 years ago when he'd arrived at Coldwater, how Kincaid had welcomed him personally with a nightstick to the ribs and the words, "Professor, huh? Well, school's out now." For 7 years, Teach had watched, learned, planned, built his network inmate by inmate, trustee by trustee. The black block now had eyes and ears in every corner of Coldwater, from the kitchen to the laundry to the infirmary. They moved information like currency, protected the vulnerable when possible, and always, always remembered. Teach had been patient. He'd absorbed Kincaid's periodic harassment with the stoicism of a man playing a longer game. But seeing the young man's bloodied face today, something shifted inside him. Perhaps it was the boy's age, so close to that, of the students he'd once taught. Perhaps it was simply that 7 years of patience had reached its natural end. As lights out approached, Teach set Baldwin aside and closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of Coldwater settling into its nighttime rhythms. Somewhere down the row he could hear Jermaine trying to muffle his pained breathing. The time for watching was over. Tomorrow the pieces would begin to move. The morning after Kincaid's inspection, the bruise on Jermaine Holloway's face had deepened to a dark purple, the cut above his eyebrow crusted with dried blood. In the fluorescent glare of the mess hall, it looked even worse than it had in the dim light of D Block. "Keep your head down and eat," Brick murmured as he slid onto the bench beside the younger inmate. Deshaun Brick Carver's massive frame made Jermaine look even smaller by comparison. At 6'5" and built like his nickname suggested, Brick rarely needed to raise his voice to command attention. "You're drawing eyes." Jermaine stabbed at his powdered eggs with barely contained fury. "That racist pig took my mama's picture." "And you'll get it back," Brick said, his deep voice pitched low enough that only Jermaine could hear him. "But not by getting yourself thrown in the hole. You understand me?" From 3 tables away, Teach observed the interaction while pretending to focus on his breakfast tray. He noticed how Brick positioned himself between Jermaine and the guard's line of sight, how the older inmate's hulking presence seemed to absorb some of the younger man's rage. Good. The boy needed protection, from Kincaid, yes, but also from himself. C.O. Parker, a heavy-set guard in his late 30s with thinning hair and perpetually sweaty palms, approached their table. "Carver," Parker said nervously, "you're needed in the laundry. Extra shift." Brick didn't acknowledge the message immediately, taking his time to finish a bite of toast. Parker fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable standing so close to the massive inmate. Finally, Brick looked up. "Sir, my assigned detail is kitchen duty till noon." Parker swallowed visibly. "Change of plans. Warden's orders." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. The warden didn't concern himself with laundry shifts, but Brick nodded slowly and stood, his tray balanced in one massive hand. "Be there in 5, he said. As Parker retreated, Brick leaned down to Jermaine. "Infirmary at 9. Don't be late." Then he carried his tray to the disposal area, nodding almost imperceptibly to Teach as he passed. Message delivered. The black block was moving. The laundry room hummed with industrial machinery, thick with steam and the chemical smell of industrial detergent. Brick folded prison uniforms with methodical precision, his large hands making the task look almost delicate. When C.O. Parker appeared at his shoulder again, Brick didn't look up. "They hanging you out to dry, Parker?" Brick asked, continuing to fold. "Sending you to deliver messages like some errand boy?" Parker glanced around nervously. They were relatively isolated in this corner of the laundry. "I'm doing you a favor, Carver, don't push it." "A favor?" Brick finally turned to face the guard. Despite Parker's authority, the officer took a small step back. "Right. Well, here's a favor back. Tell Ramsey the new shipment came in. Books for the library. Special order." Parker frowned. "That's it? A message about books?" Brick stared at him impassively. "That's it." The guard hesitated. "Carver, I'm putting my neck out here. Kincaid would what?" Brick set down the uniform he was folding and took a step closer to Parker. He didn't touch the guard. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make the smaller man retreat another step. "You afraid of Kincaid, Parker? Maybe you should be more afraid of what happens when men with nothing to lose decide they've lost enough." Parker paled. "I'll deliver your message, but we're even after this." "We were never even to begin with," Brick replied, turning back to his work. "Now go earn your paycheck." The infirmary at Coldwater occupied a windowless corridor in the administrative wing, its fluorescent lights casting everyone in the same sickly pallor. Teach arrived precisely at 9, nodding to the elderly trustee who worked as the medical assistant. "Morning, Jefferson," Teach said. "Here for my prescription refill." Jefferson, a gray-haired lifer who'd been running the infirmary longer than most guards had been at Coldwater, returned the nod. "Dr. Winters is with another inmate. Have a seat." Teach settled into one of the molded plastic chairs, noting the closed examination room door. Right on schedule, Jermaine would be inside, getting his facial laceration properly cleaned and documented. The infirmary was one of the few places in Coldwater with a modicum of privacy, and one of the few places where injuries like Jermaine's would be officially logged. Paper trails were weapons in their own right. Dr. Winters, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who drove 90 minutes each way to provide the bare minimum of medical care required by state regulations, emerged from the examination room. She spotted Teach and frowned. "Ramsey, headaches again?" "Yes, ma'am," Teach replied politely. "The fluorescent lights." She sighed, disappearing into the medication room. "I'll get your pills. But I've told you before, those headaches are probably stress-related. Nothing I can prescribe will fix that." When she returned with his medication, Teach asked casually, "Young man in there going to be all right?" Looked like a nasty cut. Dr. Winters' expression tightened. "Patient confidentiality, Ramsey. You know the rules." "Of course, doctor, just concerned for a friend." She studied him for a moment, then glanced at Jefferson, who was busying himself with inventory. In a lower voice, she said, "That's the third accidental injury from D Block this month. I've documented everything." Teach accepted the small paper cup of pills. "Documentation has a way of disappearing at Coldwater." "Not when there are copies," she replied pointedly, then raised her voice to normal volume. "Take those with water, Ramsey, and try to limit your reading time if the lights bother you so much." As Teach swallowed his medication, the examination room door opened and Jermaine emerged, a fresh butterfly bandage across his eyebrow. Their eyes met briefly, and Teach gestured slightly with his chin toward the water fountain outside the infirmary entrance. 3 minutes later, they stood side by side at the fountain, Teach taking a long drink while Jermaine waited his turn. A security camera mounted on the wall captured their images, but without audio. "Doctor, document everything?" Teach asked quietly, lips barely moving. "Yeah," Jermaine replied, hands in his pockets. "Said she's keeping her own records." "Good." Teach straightened. "It's time." Jermaine's eyes widened slightly at the three. Simple words, understanding their weight. "What do you need me to do?" "For now, heal." Stay calm. And when you see Kincaid, look afraid. Teach turned to leave, then added, "The photograph of your mother. We'll get it back." "How?" "One piece at a time," Teach replied. "That's how you dismantle anything built on fear." Sergeant Ray Kincaid entered the staff locker room, rolling his shoulders to release the tension that had been building there all morning. His shift had been quiet, too quiet. D-Block usually had a certain undercurrent of resistance, a low-level defiance that required constant vigilance. Today they'd been docile, compliant. It made him uneasy. He opened his locker, checking his personal items with habitual thoroughness. The small rituals of security were important to Kincaid. They kept the chaos at bay, maintained the boundaries between his world and theirs. He changed out of his uniform methodically, folding each item with precise creases. As he reached for his jacket, he noticed something out of place, a small slip of paper tucked into the breast pocket. Kincaid froze, then carefully extracted it with 2 fingers. Unfolding it revealed a grainy photocopy of Jermaine Holloway's intake form, with one line highlighted in yellow. Next of kin, Tanisha Holloway, mother, 1542 Oakwood Drive, Jackson, MS. Kincaid's pulse quickened. There was no message, no threat, just the address. But the meaning was clear. Someone was watching him. Someone knew what he'd done. Someone had access to his locker. He crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket. Glancing around the empty locker room with newfound suspicion, it could have been another guard, maybe that soft rookie Duke, or it could have been one of the trustees who cleaned the facility. Or it could have been someone else entirely. Kincaid slammed his locker shut with more force than necessary, the metallic bang echoing through the room. He'd find out who was behind this, and when he did, they'd learn why crossing him was the last mistake anyone made at Coldwater. Duke Merriman sat uncomfortably across from Lieutenant Reams, the older woman's steely gaze making him feel like he was back in the principal's office rather than in a colleague's workspace. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" Duke asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Reams leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Officer Merriman, you've been with us. What, 3 months now?" "Yes, ma'am." "And how are you finding Coldwater?" Duke hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's been educational." A thin smile crossed Reams's face. "Educational. That's one way to put it." She pushed a folder across her desk. "Your performance evaluations are solid. Sergeant Kincaid speaks highly of your attention to procedure." Duke doubted that very much, but he nodded. "Thank you. However," Reams continued, "there's been some concern about your hesitation during certain situations. Corrections work requires decisive action, Officer Merriman. Hesitation puts everyone at risk." Duke swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Ma'am, if this is about the incident with inmate Holloway—" "This isn't about any specific incident," Reams interrupted. "This is about the culture of Coldwater. Every correctional facility develops its own ecosystem, its own code. The guards who succeed here understand that code." "And what code is that exactly?" Duke asked, unable to keep a hint of challenge from his voice. Reams' expression hardened. "The code that keeps everyone alive, Officer Merriman. The inmates outnumber staff 15-1. The only thing standing between order and chaos is the perception of absolute authority." She leaned forward. "Do you know what happens when that perception fractures? When inmates believe they can challenge the system?" Duke remained silent. "In 1989, before your time, we had a riot in C Block," Reams continued. 3 guards died. 2 inmates. It started because one guard showed weakness, compassion, he called it. The inmates sensed it like sharks sense blood, and they attacked. She tapped the desk with one finger. "I was there, Merriman. I saw what men become when they think the rules no longer apply." "With all due respect, ma'am," Duke said, "isn't there a difference between maintaining authority and—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Excessive force?" Reams's expression was glacial. "In here, Officer Merriman, there's no such thing as excessive when it comes to maintaining control. You do well to remember that." She straightened some papers on her desk. That will be all. Duke stood, but paused before turning to leave. Lieutenant, if an inmate is seriously injured, then that inmate made a serious mistake. Reams finished for him. Don't break the code, Merriman. Not if you want a future here. Her tone softened fractionally. You're not the first young guard to struggle with the realities of this job. But those who can't adapt don't last long. Duke left her office with a hollow feeling in his stomach, her words echoing in his mind. Don't break the code. The problem was, he wasn't sure he could live with that code much longer. The infirmary was quiet when Kincaid entered later that afternoon, ostensibly to check on a guard who'd twisted his ankle during yard duty. After confirming the guard would be back on rotation the next day, Kincaid lingered, waiting until Dr. Winters left to retrieve medication from the storage room. Jefferson, the elderly trustee, watched warily as Kincaid approached the examination room where Jermaine rested. Sergeant, Jefferson began, that inmate is under medical observation until... I know exactly what he's under. Kincaid cut him off. Official business, Jefferson. Give us the room. The old man hesitated, years of survival instinct battling with something else, perhaps the remnants of human dignity that even Coldwater hadn't managed to strip away. Dr. Winters said, Dr. Winters is a contractor who comes and goes, Kincaid said, his voice dangerously soft. You, on the other hand, live here. Every day. Under my supervision. Now give us the room. Jefferson's shoulders slumped in defeat. He shuffled out, closing the infirmary door behind him. Kincaid entered the examination room to find Jermaine, lying on the narrow cot, his arm thrown over his eyes. The young man bolted upright when he sensed someone enter, his expression transforming from surprise to terror when he recognized Kincaid. Afternoon smoke, Kincaid said pleasantly, closing the door behind him. How's that face healing up? Jermaine swallowed visibly. Fine, sir. Good, good. Kincaid moved closer, standing over the cot. I see the doctor fixed you up real nice. Even got you your own private room. He glanced around the sparse examination room. Cozy. Just till tomorrow, sir, Jermaine replied, his eyes darting toward the door. You know why I'm here, don't you, Smoke? Kincaid asked, his voice still conversational. No, sir. I think you do. Kincaid reached into his pocket and withdrew. The crumpled note that had been left in his locker. See, somebody's been in my personal space, and I got to thinking, who would want to send me a message about you and your mama? Jermaine's confusion seemed genuine. I don't know what that is, sir. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No? Kincaid leaned closer. Then let me educate you. Someone in this prison thinks they can threaten me. Someone thinks they can use you to get to me. His voice hardened. I'm here to make sure you understand that whoever put this idea in your head is going to get you killed. I didn't. The first blow caught Jermaine in the solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. The second connected with his ribs, a sickening crack following the impact. Kincaid worked methodically, targeting areas that wouldn't show easily, using the skills honed through years of similar conversations. You tell your friends, Kincaid hissed between blows, that this is what happens when you play games at Coldwater. Outside the examination room, Jefferson stood with his back against the wall, eyes squeezed shut as the sounds of the beating continued. When Dr. Winters returned, she found him there trembling. Jefferson, what's... She broke off as she heard a pained grunt from behind the closed door. Her face hardened. Who's in there? Sergeant Kincaid, Jefferson whispered, said it was official business. Dr. Winters' hand flew to the doorknob, but Jefferson caught her wrist. Don't, he pleaded. Please. He'll destroy us both. The doctor's expression crumpled into helpless fury as another dull thud sounded from within. She checked her watch and reached for the landline on the desk, dialing an extension with shaking fingers. Administrative office? This is Dr. Winters, in the infirmary. I need to speak with Warden Granger immediately regarding an emergency situation. She listened for a moment, then said, "No, I cannot explain to his secretary. This is a medical emergency involving potential staff misconduct." By the time she hung up, the sounds from the examination room had stopped. The door opened and Kincaid emerged, straightening his uniform. He nodded to Dr. Winters as if nothing were amiss. "Doctor, good work on that ankle sprain. Thompson will be back on duty tomorrow." He walked out of the infirmary without a backward glance. Dr. Winters rushed into the examination room to find Jermaine curled on his side, blood bubbling from his lips with each labored breath. She immediately pressed the emergency call button. "Jefferson, get a gurney, now." Word traveled through Coldwater like electricity through a wire. By lights out, every inmate in every block knew what had happened in the infirmary. The block's communication network, a sophisticated system of trustees, kitchen workers, maintenance crews, and carefully placed allies, ensured that the details reached Teach within hours. Jermaine had been transferred to the prison medical ward with 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and internal bleeding. Dr. Winters had demanded outside medical intervention, but Warden Granger had overruled her, citing security protocols. Instead, a prison doctor had been called in from another facility to perform the necessary procedures to stabilize the young inmate. No incident report had been filed. No investigation had been opened. Business as usual at Coldwater. In the darkness of his cell, Teach lay on his bunk, eyes open, listening to the nighttime sounds of the prison. The soft sobs of a new inmate 3 cells down, the whispered prayers of the old man across the row, the occasional shout or laugh quickly silenced by a guard's warning. He thought of Jermaine, barely more than a boy, lying broken in the medical ward. He thought of Dr. Winters, fighting a system designed to crush anyone who questioned its methods. He thought of Duke Merriman, caught between conscience and survival, and he thought of Ray Kincaid, sleeping soundly in his home outside the prison walls, confident in his impunity. The message in Kincaid's locker had been Phase 1, a test to gauge the sergeant's reaction, to confirm what Teach already suspected. Kincaid was growing paranoid, but the severity of his response to Jermaine had accelerated the timeline. They couldn't afford to be patient any longer. A soft tap on the bars of his cell pulled Teach from his thoughts. It was Jefferson, making his nightly rounds with the medication cart. "Ramsey," the old man whispered, "your headache pills." Teach approached the bars, accepting the small paper cup. But instead of pills, it contained a tightly folded note. He palmed it smoothly, pretending to swallow medication, with the tiny cup of water Jefferson offered. "How bad tonight?" Jefferson asked, loud enough for the night guard to hear. "Manageable," Teach replied. "Thank you." Once Jefferson had moved on, Teach returned to his bunk and carefully unfolded the note. In Dr. Winters's precise handwriting, everything documented. "Copies sent to my home address and attorney. Using personal camera tomorrow for evidence. Be ready." Teach allowed himself a small, grim smile in the darkness. Dr. Winters had just become an unexpected ally, one with access to the outside world. He refolded the note into a tiny square and flushed it down his cell toilet. Then he closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. The first tremor had been sent. Now it was time for the earthquake. The next morning, chaos erupted in B Block. What began as a simple altercation between 2 inmates during breakfast escalated with suspicious speed. Within minutes, 3 separate fights had broken out in the mess hall. Guards rushed to contain the violence, calling for backup as chairs flew and inmates formed tight, defensive circles. Lieutenant Reams arrived on the scene, barking orders as the situation deteriorated. "Lock down B Block. All available personnel respond." In the confusion, few noticed the small group of trustees who slipped away from their assigned posts. Fewer still noticed when Brick Carver, who shouldn't have been anywhere near B Block, appeared briefly at the periphery of the disturbance before disappearing down a service corridor. And no one noticed Teach Ramsey, quietly sitting in the library during his regular shift, calmly reading Baldwin as if nothing unusual were happening elsewhere in the facility. The B Block riot lasted 23 minutes. When order was finally restored, 2 inmates and 1 guard had been treated for minor injuries. A full contraband sweep was initiated, keeping most of the security staff occupied for hours, which was exactly what Teach had planned. In the administrative wing's rarely used conference room, 6 men gathered while the facility's attention was focused elsewhere. Brick stood guard at the door while Teach addressed the others, each a key figure in the Black Bloc's network. "Dr. Winters has documentation," Teach explained quietly. "And soon she'll have photographic evidence, but we need more." "The camera in the infirmary corridor," said a slight man named Marcus who worked in maintenance. "I can loop the feed for 15 minutes tomorrow during shift change." "That's when we move Kincaid's locker contents," added another inmate, a former accountant named Phillips who worked in the front office as a clerk. "I've got access to the files we need." Teach nodded. "Remember, we're not just targeting Kincaid. The whole system protects him, Reams, Granger, all of them. We need evidence against each link in the chain." "What about the rookie guard?" asked a heavy-set trustee who ran the commissary. "Merriman. He seems uncomfortable with Kincaid's methods." "We watch him," Teach replied. "He might be useful, or he might be dangerous. For now, he's not part of the equation." A soft knock at the door signaled their time was up. Brick opened it a crack, then nodded to the others. 30 seconds, he warned. As the men prepared to disperse, Teach offered a final thought. "What happened to Jermaine is just the beginning. Kincaid is escalating, which means he's afraid. Fear makes men like him dangerous, but it also makes them careless." He looked each man in the eye. "Be patient, be precise, and remember why we're doing this." "For Jermaine," Brick rumbled. "For all of us," Teach corrected softly. "Now move." In the medical ward, Jermaine Holloway drifted in and out of consciousness, his broken body wrapped in bandages and connected to an oxygen tank. Through the haze of pain medication, he was only vaguely aware of the figure that slipped into his room during evening rounds. "Jermaine," a voice called softly, pulling him from the fog. "Can you hear me?" He forced his eyes open to find Teach standing beside his bed, concern etched on his normally impassive features. "Teach," Jermaine whispered, his voice barely audible. "He jumped me." "I know." Teach glanced toward the door where Brick's massive silhouette was visible through the small window. "We don't have much time." "Did I mess up?" Jermaine asked, tears welling in his eyes. "Did I say something I shouldn't have?" "No," Teach assured him, resting a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "You did nothing wrong. This is on Kincaid, not you." "Why me?" Jermaine's voice broke. "What did I do to make him hate me so much?" Teach's expression darkened. "It's not about you, Jermaine. Men like Kincaid need someone to hate. It's how they make sense of the world. They need to believe they're superior, and the easiest way to do that is to decide someone else is inferior." He paused. "But make no mistake, this started long before you arrived at Coldwater, and it won't end with you." "What do we do now?" Jermaine asked, his eyes already growing heavy as the medication pulled him back toward unconsciousness. "We fight back," Teach replied, "but not the way he expects." He leaned closer. "Rest. Heal. The next time you see daylight, things at Coldwater will already be changing." As Jermaine drifted off again, Teach carefully placed something on the bedside table, a small, worn photograph of a smiling woman. Jermaine's mother returned as promised. One piece at a time, Teach thought as he slipped out of the room. That's how you dismantle anything built on fear. 1 week after Jermaine's beating, a single sheet of paper changed everything at Coldwater. Lieutenant Reams stared at the disciplinary report on her desk, her lips pressed into a thin line. The document detailed an incident between Sergeant Kincaid and an inmate named Wilson, a confrontation that had supposedly resulted in contraband being confiscated. The report bore Kincaid's signature and followed proper protocol in every detail. Except Wilson had been transferred to another facility 2 days before the alleged incident. "Explain this," Reams demanded, sliding the paper across her desk to Kincaid. Kincaid studied the report, confusion giving way to anger. "This isn't mine," he insisted. "I never filed this." "That's your signature." "It's forged." Reams leaned back in her chair. "And how would someone access the electronic system to file a report under your credentials? Or are you suggesting someone broke into your locker, stole your signature, stamp, and then returned it without you noticing?" Kincaid's jaw tightened. "I'm saying someone's trying to set me up." "Who, Ray? Who at Coldwater has it out for you?" The question hung in the air, and Kincaid's mind immediately went to Teach. But there was no evidence, only suspicion, and he knew how that would sound to Reams. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But I'll find out." Reams sighed, closing the folder. "This is the kind of mistake that raises flags during audits. Whatever's going on with you, handle it. You're making enemies, Ray, and paperwork errors can end careers faster than inmate complaints." As Kincaid left her office, the disciplinary report was quietly added to his personnel file, a small crack in his once impeccable record. In the library, Teach sorted through returned books with methodical care, selecting certain volumes to be reshelved in specific locations. Each book contained a small mark inside, a dot, a dash, an underlined word, signals to the inmates who would check them out next. The Black Block's communication network had evolved beyond simple messages. Now it was about synchronization. That evening, during the 6 p.m. count, the small act of rebellion began. When the guards called for inmates to stand for inspection, D Block responded with a 3-second delay, just long enough to notice, not long enough to punish. B Block followed 2 days later. Then, A Block. Simple gestures multiplied. Inmates stopped conversations when certain guards walked by, creating pockets of unnatural silence. Meal trays were returned in perfect order rather than the usual disarray. Every black inmate in the yard walked clockwise during exercise period, while, before they had moved randomly. None of it was actionable. None of it violated rules, but everyone, especially Kincaid, felt the change. "Something's happening," Kincaid told Duke as they walked the perimeter of the yard. "You feel it?" Duke kept his eyes forward, watching the inmates move in their measured, clockwise pattern. "Feel what, Sergeant?" "They're organizing, communicating, somehow." Kincaid's eyes narrowed as he scanned the yard. "How's a man like Ramsey running things from the library? Who's carrying his messages?" "I haven't seen anything unusual," Duke replied carefully. Kincaid turned on him. "Then you're not looking hard enough. These aren't just prisoners anymore. They're soldiers in formation." He grabbed Duke's arm. "I need those rotation schedules for next week. We're changing everything up." "The schedules are already posted," Duke said. "Lieutenant Reams has to approve changes. Then unpost them. I want new rotations, new cell assignments, new meal groups. Break their patterns." Duke hesitated. "I can request changes, but..." "Don't request, do it." Kincaid's grip tightened. "Unless you'd rather explain to the warden why you're interfering with security protocols." After Kincaid walked away, Duke stood alone watching the inmates continue their circular path. As if sensing his gaze, Teach looked up from across the yard. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the choice Duke now faced. The guard rotation schedules disappeared from the staff room later that day. By evening, they had reappeared on Lieutenant Reams' desk along with a note suggesting a security breach. The next morning, the original schedules remained in place, but with 2 guards reassigned from their usual posts. One of them, Kincaid, moved from D Block to the less prestigious kitchen duty. Teach learned of the change through Marcus, the maintenance trustee who overheard Kincaid's furious objection in Reams's office. "He's coming apart," Marcus whispered as he replaced a light fixture in the library. Called the lieutenant a paper-pushing bitch right to her face. Teach nodded, shelving books as they spoke. And the reaction? Reams shut him down cold. Said if he wanted to file a formal complaint, she'd be happy to attach it to his growing file of irregularities. Good. Teach handed Marcus a book, Machiavelli's The Prince, with a small slip of paper tucked inside. Phase 2 begins tonight. Make sure everyone knows their part. At 3 a.m., Kincaid woke to his phone ringing. It was the night watch commander at Coldwater. "We need you to come in, Sergeant." There's been an incident. When Kincaid arrived, he found Reams waiting in the administration building, her expression grave. Someone accessed your office, she said without preamble. Security footage shows a figure entering at 1:17 a.m., but the camera angle doesn't give us a clear view. Kincaid pushed past her to his small office. Nothing seemed disturbed at first glance. Desk in order, file cabinet locked, computer untouched. Then he saw it on his corkboard. Jermaine's mother's photograph pinned with a metal spike through her face, and beneath it, written in what looked like blood. Blood doesn't drown silence. Kincaid ripped it down, hands shaking with rage. Where's Ramsey? In his cell where he's been all night, Reams replied, watching him carefully. We've checked the logs, no movement from D block. He's behind this, Kincaid insisted. He's got people helping him. You need to calm down, Ray, Reams said. If you go off half-cocked, calm down. Kincaid turned on her. This is a direct threat. To me, in my own office. Is that his mother's photograph? Reams asked suddenly, eyeing the picture in his hand. The one from his personal effects? Kincaid faltered. I confiscated it. Contraband. Was it logged as contraband? Because I don't recall seeing any report. The trap closed around him, and Kincaid realized too late that he'd walked right into it. If he admitted taking the photo without logging it, he'd be admitting to a procedural violation. If he claimed it was properly logged, the absence of documentation would prove him a liar. I'm going to find whoever did this, he said instead, pocketing the photograph. Reams sighed. Go home, Ray. Get some sleep. And when you come back for your shift, I expect you focused on your duties, not personal vendettas. But sleep didn't come. Kincaid sat in his truck in the Coldwater parking lot until dawn, watching the prison's silhouette against the lightening sky, feeling for the first time like the walls were closing in. He's starting to crack, Teach told Brick as they exercised in the yard the next day. Their conversation looked casual to observers, just two inmates doing push-ups side by side. Not fast enough, Brick replied between sets. Word from the medical ward is Jermaine's still coughing blood. Patience, Teach counseled. Kincaid's making mistakes now. Each one weakens his position. And what about the young guard? Merriman? Teach's expression remained neutral as he completed another push-up. He's conflicted, useful. Or dangerous, Brick countered. He could expose everything. He won't. How can you be sure? Teach paused, looking across the yard to where Duke stood watching them, his young face troubled. Because he wants to do the right thing. He just doesn't know what that is yet. The message appeared in Kincaid's locker later that week, carved into the metal with something sharp. We see everything. He slammed the locker shut and spun around, searching the empty room as if he might catch someone watching. But there was only silence, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. In the days that followed, Kincaid's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He wrote up 3 guards for minor infractions. He conducted random searches that yielded nothing but disruption. His reports became sloppy, his temper shorter. And through it all, the invisible presence of the black bloc grew stronger. Notes appeared in unexpected places. Schedules were mysteriously altered. Surveillance footage from key areas went missing for crucial minutes. The prison seemed to have eyes and ears everywhere, all feeding information back to Teach in the library, who orchestrated each move like a chess master seeing 10 steps ahead. Duke found the envelope in his locker on Thursday. Inside was a printed copy of the guard rotation schedule, the very one Kincaid had ordered him to change, with a handwritten note, choose. He knew what it meant. The black bloc was asking him to leak information or perhaps testing if he already had. Either way, it was a point of no return. That night, Duke made his way to the library under the pretense of retrieving a training manual. Teach was there reorganizing a shelf of reference books. I need to talk to you, Duke said, keeping his voice low. Teach didn't look up. About what, officer? You know what. Duke glanced around to ensure they were alone. I found something in my locker. Careless of someone, Teach replied calmly. I won't be part of this, Duke insisted. Whatever you're planning. Whatever. Who is planning? Teach finally turned to face him. I'm just a prisoner serving his time, Officer Merriman. Cut the act, Duke hissed. I know you're behind what's happening to Kincaid. And what exactly is happening to Sergeant Kincaid? Teach asked, his voice still level. Is he being beaten, humiliated, denied basic dignity, or is he simply facing the consequences of his actions for the first time? Duke had no answer. Let me ask you something, Teach continued. When you saw what he did to Jermaine Holloway, what did you do about it? I couldn't. Exactly. You couldn't. None of us can, individually. The system is designed that way. Teach shelved the last book and faced Duke fully. But collectively, we might have a chance at justice. This isn't justice, Duke argued. This is revenge. Revenge would be Kincaid lying in the infirmary with broken ribs, Teach replied softly. This is accountability, something Coldwater has never seen before. Duke shook his head. I won't be your informant. Then don't be, Teach said simply. But when the time comes to choose a side, remember who the real victims are in this place. He turned back to his work. That will be all, officer. Duke left without another word, the envelope still in his pocket, his decision still unmade. As Kincaid's paranoia grew, so did the unity of the inmates under Teach's quiet guidance. What had begun as isolated acts of defiance became a coordinated resistance, silent but unmistakable. In the mess hall, inmates began leaving their trays in precise patterns. In the yard, exercise groups formed geometric shapes visible only from the guard towers. During work details, productivity mysteriously dropped by exactly 15% across all assignments. Lieutenant Reams noticed. Warden Granger noticed. But there was nothing concrete to act upon. No rules broken, no direct challenges to authority. Just a prison that no longer behaved as expected. When Kincaid burst into Reams's office with wild claims about a prisoner uprising, she finally lost patience. Enough, Ray, she snapped. You're seeing conspiracies where there are none. They're mocking us, Kincaid insisted. Testing the boundaries. It's all building to something. The only thing building is my concern about your fitness for duty, Reams replied. Your behavior is becoming a liability. My behavior? Kincaid's voice rose. What about Ramsey? Have you checked his library records? The books he's distributing? I've reviewed everything, Reams said coldly. The only irregularities I'm finding are in your area of responsibility. Kincaid leaned across her desk. You're blind. All of you. While you're shuffling papers, they're taking control. And when it happens, the blood will be on your hands. He stormed out, leaving Reams staring after him with growing concern. For the first time, she wondered if Kincaid's instability might be the greater threat to Coldwater's order. In his cell that night, Teach lay awake, mentally reviewing the pieces in play. Kincaid was unraveling faster than anticipated. Reams was beginning to distance herself. Duke remained undecided but increasingly troubled. Dr. Winters had documented everything and was prepared to testify if needed. All the elements were aligning, but the most crucial phase was yet to come. Teach closed his eyes, thinking of Jermaine, still recovering in the medical ward. The boy's suffering would have meaning. It would be the catalyst for change at Coldwater, not just for the black inmates, but for everyone trapped in a system designed to break them. Tomorrow they would escalate to Phase 3. The cracks in Kincaid's armor were widening. One more push and he would shatter completely. Solitary confinement, Kincaid announced, slapping 5 files onto Reams's desk. I want these inmates in the hole. Today. Lieutenant Reams opened the top file. Deshaun Carver. On what grounds? Suspicion of organizing gang activity. Evidence? Kincaid's jaw tightened. My professional assessment. Reams flipped through the other files. All key figures Teach had positioned throughout Coldwater. All black. All without disciplinary records in the past year. This is thin, Ray, she said finally. Very thin. These men are the backbone of whatever Ramsey's building, Kincaid insisted. Cut them off and his network collapses. Reams hesitated. Under normal circumstances, she might have rejected the request outright. But the federal inspection loomed just 2 weeks away, and the subtle shift in inmate behavior had her concerned. Enough to consider drastic measures. 3, she said finally. You can put 3 in solitary. Choose carefully. Kincaid didn't hesitate. Carver, Phillips, Marcus. Brick, the office clerk, the maintenance man, Teach's most valuable lieutenants. 48 hours, Reams added. That's all you get. And Ray, this better work. The isolation cells at Coldwater were buried in the oldest section of the prison, a windowless concrete labyrinth 20 feet below ground level. Guards called it the Hole. Inmates had darker names for it. Brick stood impassively as the heavy steel door closed behind him, sealing him in an 8x10 cell with nothing but a concrete slab for a bed, a stainless steel toilet, and a dim light that never turned off. He'd been here before, they all had. The Hole was Kincaid's favorite threat, his go-to punishment for any inmate who dared challenge his authority. But this time was different. This time, Brick was here by design. The moment the door closed, he began counting silently. 23. Minutes later, like clockwork, a small metal slot in the door slid open. Meal delivery. Dinner, announced a bored voice. A tray slid through the slot. Brick approached slowly, recognizing C.O. Parker's voice. Hungry work down here, he replied quietly. Parker hesitated. 15 minutes, he whispered, then slid something else through the slot. A small plastic bag containing tobacco, matches, and a folded piece of paper. Brick nodded. Appreciate it. The slot closed and Brick returned to the concrete slab, carefully unfolding the note. Everything proceeding. Phase 3 activated. Hold position. In the library, Teach worked with unusual focus, aware that Kincaid would be watching him closely now. 3 of his key people were in the Hole exactly as they had anticipated. The question was whether Kincaid would stop there. His answer came when Duke Merriman appeared at the library door looking uncomfortable. Ramsey, Duke said officially. Random cell search. Let's go. Teach set down his book and stood without protest. As they walked back to D Block, Duke kept his voice low. Kincaid's on a warpath. Already tore apart 3 cells. I'm aware, officer, Teach replied calmly. Is there something specific you want me to know? Duke hesitated. He's gunning for you directly now, says you're the ringleader. And what? Do you think, Officer Merriman? I think, Duke paused, choosing his words carefully. I think he's making a mistake. Putting those men in solitary, it's only making things worse. They reached D Block where Kincaid was waiting, a triumphant gleam in his eye. Well, well. The professor returns to his chambers, Kincaid said. Let's see what kind of contraband a man of learning keeps, shall we? The cell search was brutal and thorough. Kincaid upended Teach's mattress, scattered his few possessions, and confiscated his books, including a Bible and a copy of the prison regulations that every inmate was entitled to possess. Through it all, Teach remained silent, his face betraying nothing. When Kincaid finally left, having found nothing incriminating, Duke lingered to help Teach reorganize his cell. He'll isolate you next, Duke warned quietly. Perhaps, Teach agreed. How can you be so calm about this? Teach smiled slightly. Because, Officer Merriman, isolation is exactly what we've been planning for. That evening, while the prison buzzed with rumors of the solitary confinements, Teach convened a small gathering in the far corner of the yard. The men who joined him weren't his usual associates. They were older inmates, many of them white, who typically kept to themselves. Gentlemen, Teach began quietly, I appreciate you meeting with me. An elderly white inmate with faded Nazi tattoos on his knuckles spoke first. You've got balls, Ramsey, I'll give you that. What's this about? It's about Warden Granger's cleanup operation, Teach replied. You know it's coming, the federal inspection. Suddenly the food will improve, the guards will put on their Sunday manners, and all of us will be expected to play along with the charade. So? asked another man, a lifer in his 60s. So, I'm suggesting we choose a different script. Teach said. One that serves our interests, not theirs. Our interests? The old Nazi raised an eyebrow. Since when do you care about anyone outside your black bloc? Teach met his gaze steadily. Since I realize that Kincaid and Granger don't discriminate when it comes to denying basic humanity. They may hate some of us more than others, but they see all of us as animals. A murmur ran through the small group. Teach continued. You've seen what's happening. Kincaid spinning out, the administration scrambling. For the first time there are cracks in their system. And you want us to help widen those cracks, the lifer surmised. I want us to show the feds what Coldwater really is, Teach corrected, not the sanitized version Granger plans to present. The Nazi studied him for a long moment. What's in it for us? The same thing all of us want, Teach replied. Dignity, basic rights, a chance to serve our time without being tortured for sport. The men exchanged glances, decades of prison-hardened suspicion battling against the undeniable logic of Teach's proposal. What exactly are you asking us to do? The lifer finally asked. Teach smiled. Just be ready, and when you see the signal, stand together. Duke found the USB drive tucked into his uniform pocket at the end of his shift, a small black rectangle no bigger than his thumbnail. He had no idea who had placed it there or when, but he knew instinctively that it was meant for him. That night, in the privacy of his small apartment, he plugged it into his laptop. The drive contained a single video file, dated 3 months earlier. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Security camera view of a Coldwater hallway. Kincaid and another guard escorted a black inmate out of view. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. At 3:36 a.m., Kincaid reappeared alone, straightening his uniform. At 3:42 a.m., the second guard emerged, helping the inmate limp toward the infirmary, blood visibly soaking through his shirt. Duke felt sick. He'd heard rumors of Kincaid's night lessons, beatings conducted in blind spots of the surveillance system, but seeing the evidence made it real in a way whispers never could. He ejected the drive and sat in silence, turning it over in his hand. The choice Teach had mentioned now lay directly before him: remain complicit in a system of abuse, or take a stand that would likely end his career, and possibly put him in danger. Duke pocketed the drive and poured himself a drink, knowing sleep would not come easily that night. Warden Granger's cleanup operation began with a facility-wide shakedown 3 days before the federal inspection. Guards swept through cells with ruthless efficiency, confiscating anything that might raise questions, from innocuous contraband like extra food to the more troubling evidence of neglect and abuse. I want this place spotless, Granger instructed the assembled staff. Any inmate who makes this difficult goes to the hole until after the inspection. Any staff member who fails to maintain the standard I expect will be explaining themselves to the board. Kincaid approached him after the meeting. Sir, about Ramsey. Handle it, Granger cut him off, quietly. I don't care how, but that man needs to be invisible when the feds arrive. Kincaid nodded, a cruel smile spreading across his face. With pleasure, sir. In the laundry room, a young inmate named Tyrell sorted uniforms with mechanical precision, keeping his head down. As Kincaid entered, the sergeant approached slowly, checking that they were alone before speaking. You worked on Marcus's maintenance crew, didn't you, boy? Tyrell swallowed nervously. Yes, sir. And now suddenly you're in laundry. Interesting timing. They needed help, sir, Tyrell replied, eyes fixed on the uniforms. Kincaid moved closer. I think you know more than you're saying about Marcus, about Ramsey, about this whole operation they're running. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. Kincaid's hand shot out, grabbing Tyrell by the throat and slamming him against the wall. Don't lie to me, boy. I know Ramsey's got something planned for the inspection. Tell me what it is. I can't. I don't. Tyrell gasped, clawing at Kincaid's grip. Wrong answer, Kincaid snarled, punching him hard in the stomach. As Terrell doubled over, Kincaid delivered a second blow to his kidney. What Kincaid didn't notice was the small cell phone placed on a high shelf among folded sheets, its camera, lens capturing everything. "They've taken Tyrell to the infirmary," Phillips, the office clerk, reported to Teach during dinner. Having served his 48 hours in solitary, he'd returned to general population that morning. Broken ribs, internal bruising. Kincaid worked him over good. Teach nodded grimly. "And the footage?" "Secure. Duke found another USB in his locker this morning. This one labeled with Granger's email address." "How did he react?" Phillips allowed, himself a small smile. "Looked like he'd seen a ghost." "Good." Teach pushed his tray away. "Any word from Brick?" "Still in the hole." Kincaid got Reams to extend his stay through the inspection. Teach's expression darkened. "Then we move up the timeline. The feds arrive tomorrow. We need everything in place tonight." The solitary confinement wing was silent except for the occasional muffled cough or whispered prayer. Brick lay on his concrete slab, eyes closed but fully alert, counting the minutes until the night guard's rounds. When the small slot in his door slid open, it wasn't Parker but Duke who peered in. 5 minutes, Duke whispered, passing a folded paper through the opening. "They've moved up the timeline." Brick unfolded the note, reading Teach's instructions. "You made your choice," he observed, studying Duke's face. The young guard nodded tightly. "I saw the videos, all of them." "Then you know what needs to happen?" "Yeah," Duke agreed quietly. "I know." After he left, Brick tore the note into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. Then he settled back onto the slab and waited. Everything was in motion now. On the morning of the federal inspection, Warden Granger stood in his freshly pressed suit, flanked by Lieutenant Reams and a visibly agitated Kincaid. "Remember," Granger instructed them, "the key is to present Coldwater as a model of rehabilitation and security. The feds are looking for reasons to impose new regulations. Don't give them any." A black SUV pulled into the parking lot, and 3 Department of Justice officials emerged, led by a stern-looking woman in her 50s. "Showtime," Granger muttered, plastering on his politician's smile as they approached. The tour began smoothly. The common areas had been scrubbed to an artificial shine. Inmates sat quietly at activities designed to showcase rehabilitation efforts. The kitchen served an unusually nutritious lunch. Guards maintained professional demeanors. It was, as Teach had predicted, a carefully orchestrated charade. The DOJ officials took notes and asked routine questions. Everything was proceeding according to Granger's plan until they reached the administrative offices, where the lead inspector requested access to personnel files and incident reports. "Of course," Granger agreed smoothly. "Lieutenant Reams can assist you with those." As Reams led the officials to the records room, her phone buzzed with an email notification. She glanced at it casually, then froze. The subject line read, "Evidence of abuse at Coldwater, now playing in records room." She quickened her pace, heart pounding, but it was too late. As they entered the records room, the computer monitor on the desk was already playing the video of Kincaid assaulting Tyrell in the laundry room, the footage crystal clear and unmistakable. The lead inspector stopped short. "What is this?" Reams struggled to maintain composure. I'm not sure. Some kind of prank." "That's Sergeant Kincaid, isn't it?" the inspector asked, her voice sharpening. Before Reams could answer, the video changed to a different clip. Kincaid beating Jermaine in the infirmary, then another, and another. A montage of brutality punctuated by dates and times. "Turn it off," Reams ordered, rushing to the computer. But the keyboard was locked, the video continuing to play as the DOJ officials watched in stunned silence. Over the facility intercom, Granger's voice suddenly echoed, "Lieutenant Reams, please report to the warden's office immediately. Repeat, Lieutenant Reams to the warden's office." The lead inspector fixed Reams with a cold stare. "I think we'll all be going to the warden's office," she said, "after we finish watching this evidence that someone very much wanted us to see." Teach sat calmly in the library, reshelving books as the facility exploded into controlled chaos around him. Through the windows, he could see additional federal vehicles arriving. Guards hurried through corridors with worried expressions. The intercom crackled with coded messages. Phase 3 was complete. The truth about Coldwater was exposed. Now came the most dangerous part, the administration's reaction. Duke appeared at the library door, his face pale. "They're looking for you," he warned. "Kincaid convinced Granger you orchestrated everything. He's on his way here now." Teach nodded, unsurprised. "Thank you, Officer Merriman." "You need to hide or something," Duke insisted. "No," Teach replied calmly, setting down his book. "Hiding would suggest guilt. I've done nothing wrong." "They don't care about wrong." Duke's voice rose in frustration. "Kincaid is out for blood, and Granger will sacrifice anyone to save himself." "I know," Teach said. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." He could hear the angry footsteps approaching now, Kincaid's distinctive stride heavy with rage. "Go, Officer Merriman," Teach urged. "What happens next isn't something you want to be part of." Duke hesitated, then slipped away just as Kincaid burst into the library, eyes wild, face contorted with fury. "You," he snarled, advancing on Teach. "You're finished." Teach faced him calmly. "I believe that's my line, Sergeant." The videos went viral 36 hours after the federal inspection. Anonymous uploads appeared simultaneously on multiple platforms. Kincaid assaulting Jermaine, Kincaid beating Terrell, and a compilation of other abuses spanning years. Each clip had been meticulously edited to blur inmates' faces while keeping Kincaid's identity crystal clear. By morning, news vans lined the road outside Coldwater. Protesters arrived by afternoon, their signs demanding justice for inmates and accountability for prison officials. "Coldwater kills," read one. "Private prisons, public atrocities," declared another. Inside the administration building, Warden Granger paced his office as the PR team from Meridian Corrections Corporation attempted damage control via conference call. "The videos are doctored," insisted Meridian's lead counsel. "That's our official position. We deny any systematic abuse and characterize these as isolated incidents being investigated internally." "And Kincaid?" Granger asked, loosening his tie. The strain of the past 24 hours had aged him visibly. "Suspended with pay pending investigation," the lawyer replied. "No admission of guilt. We're preparing a statement about his exemplary record and the challenging environment of corrections work." Lieutenant Reams, standing stiffly near the window, finally spoke. "The feds have already copied our records. They've interviewed 6 inmates and 4 staff members." "What staff?" Granger demanded. "Dr. Winters, Parker, Thompson, and that new guard, Merriman," Granger cursed under his breath. "Find out what they told the DOJ. And Reams, contain Kincaid. He's unstable, and the last thing we need is him going rogue while the world is watching." Kincaid sat in his truck in the prison parking lot, engine running, radio blaring the local news. His name had been mentioned 17 times in the past hour. Allegations of systematic abuse at Coldwater Penitentiary have sparked nationwide outrage. Sergeant Raymond Kincaid, seen in the disturbing footage, has been suspended pending investigation. He switched it off, hands shaking with rage. His cell phone buzzed. Another call from Reams that he would ignore. The administration was cutting him loose, feeding him to the wolves to save themselves. After 20 years of doing their dirty work, enforcing their unwritten rules, being the muscle behind their profits, this was his reward. Kincaid opened his glove compartment and removed his personal firearm, a .38 revolver he'd carried since his early days as a corrections officer. He checked the chamber, verifying all 6 rounds were loaded, then tucked it into his jacket. He knew who was responsible. And if they thought suspending him would keep him away from Coldwater, they were about to learn how wrong they were. We sat across from Lieutenant Reams in the small interview room, maintaining a carefully neutral expression as she questioned him. "Let's be clear, Officer Merriman," Reams said. "Your future at Coldwater, possibly in corrections entirely, depends on how you handle the next few days." "Yes, ma'am," Duke replied. "You told the DOJ inspectors you had no knowledge of the videos before they appeared in the records room. Is that your final statement?" Duke met her gaze. Yes, ma'am. Reams studied him, searching for signs of deception. And your relationship with inmates, particularly Ramsey? Professional, Duke said. I've had minimal interaction with him outside my regular duties. Several guards reported seeing you speak with him in the library. I retrieve training. Materials from the library, Duke explained. Sometimes I exchange pleasantries with inmates who work there. It's called building rapport. They taught us that in training. Ream's eyes narrowed slightly at his tone, but she moved on. What about visits to solitary confinement during off hours? Duke's heart skipped, but his face betrayed nothing. I've covered shifts when needed. Everything's documented in the logbooks. After a long silence, Reams seemed to reach a decision. Officer Merriman, Coldwater is in crisis. The administration needs to know who its allies are. You're either with us or you're part of the problem. I understand, Duke said carefully. But I'm not sure what you're asking me to do. Watch Ramsey, Reams replied bluntly. Report everything. Who he talks to, what books he handles, when he uses the bathroom. We need to build a case that he orchestrated this entire campaign. And if he didn't? Reams's smile was cold. Everyone's guilty of something at Coldwater, Merriman. It's just a matter of finding the right charge. She stood, signaling the end of the interview. Think about where your loyalties lie. In D Block, Teach moved through the common area with quiet dignity, aware of the shifted dynamic. Inmates nodded to him with newfound respect. Some reached out to touch his shoulder or arm as he passed, silent acknowledgments of what everyone now knew. The Black Bloc had won a battle in a war most had thought unwinnable. Brick, released from solitary, that morning, joined him at a corner table. You're a damn celebrity, Teach, he observed, his voice low. Celebration is premature, Teach cautioned. Kincaid is suspended, not gone. Granger is cornered, which makes him dangerous. And the media attention will fade. It always does. But the feds are involved now, Brick argued. That changes things. It changes the battlefield, not the war, Teach replied. We've exposed one brutal guard. The system that created him remains intact. Around them, the block buzzed with unusual energy. Inmates moved with straighter backs, spoke with less caution. The taste of victory, however small, had awakened something long dormant in Coldwater: hope. Jefferson, the elderly medical trustee, approached their table. Thought you should know, he said quietly. Kincaid's been in the parking lot for hours. Guards say he's armed. Teach nodded, unsurprised. Spread the word. Everyone stays alert, no one moves alone. After Jefferson left, Brick leaned closer. You think he's coming for you? I know he is, Teach replied. The question is when. As evening approached, the protesters outside Coldwater grew louder, their chants audible even within the prison walls. Floodlights illuminated the parking lot where police had established a perimeter, keeping the media and activists at a distance. In his office, Granger received the call he'd been dreading. The board has made its decision, said the Meridian executive on the other end. We're announcing your administrative leave tomorrow morning, effective immediately. Administrative leave? Granger repeated incredulously. I've given 10 years to Coldwater. I've kept it profitable when other facilities were losing millions. And we appreciate your service, the executive replied smoothly. But the optics require decisive action. The statement will cite your request for leave to allow for a thorough, impartial investigation. This is bullshit and you know it, Granger snapped. I'm being sacrificed to protect the company. We're all making sacrifices, Ellis. The executive's tone hardened. Your severance package is generous. I suggest you focus on that rather than fighting a battle you can't win. After hanging up, Granger sat in silence, staring at the wall where his framed credentials hung. 10 years of his life, erased with a single phone call. All because of some inmates with cell phones and a bleeding heart doctor who couldn't understand what it took to maintain order. He reached for the intercom. Get me Lieutenant Reams, he ordered, and initiate full lockdown protocol. No one enters or leaves until further notice. The lockdown announcement crackled over the PA system at 8:17 p.m. Inmates were ordered to their cells immediately. All non-essential staff were dismissed. Essential personnel were restricted to designated secure areas. In the library, Teach calmly shelved the last few books before turning to Duke, who stood watching from the doorway. "Time to go, Ramsey," Duke said officially, aware of cameras monitoring them. As they walked toward D Block, Duke kept his voice low. "Granger's been suspended. Reams is in charge now. She wanted me to spy on you." "And what did you tell her?" Teach asked. "What she wanted to hear," Duke replied. "But there's something else. Kincaid's access card was used at the east entrance 20 minutes ago. He's inside the facility." Teach absorbed this without visible reaction. "The lockdown isn't about the protests, then?" "I don't think so," Duke agreed. "It's the perfect cover. With everyone confined and staff minimized, he can move through blind spots in the surveillance system." "And come for me," Teach concluded. "You need protection," Duke insisted. "I can arrange for you to be moved to administrative segregation." "No," Teach interrupted firmly. "That's exactly what they want, to isolate me from the others. Kincaid isn't the only threat." They reached D Block, where guards were herding inmates into cells. Brick caught Teach's eye from across the room, his expression questioning. Teach gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Be careful, Ramsey," Duke said as Teach entered his cell. "Kincaid's got nothing left to lose." "Neither do I, Officer Merriman," Teach replied. That's what he never understood. In the administrative wing, Reams coordinated the lockdown while fielding calls from increasingly hostile media outlets. The DOJ team had departed hours ago, taking copies of personnel files, medical records, and surveillance footage with them. Their preliminary report had recommended immediate federal oversight of Coldwater, a devastating blow to Meridian's autonomy. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Winters stood in the doorway, medical bag in hand. "I need to check on Holloway. And Tyrell," she said without preamble. "Lockdown protocols don't supersede medical necessity." Reams sighed. "Fine, but take a guard with you." "I'd rather not," Dr. Winters replied. "Given recent events, inmates might be reluctant to speak freely with security present." "This isn't a negotiation, Doctor," Reams snapped. "We have an unstable former employee potentially on the grounds. No one moves through this facility alone tonight." Dr. Winters held her gaze. "Then you should know I've submitted detailed testimony to the DOJ, including documentation of 37 instances of abuse I've treated over the past year, most involving Sergeant Kincaid." "You exceeded your authority," Reams said coldly. "I fulfilled my ethical obligation," Dr. Winters corrected. "Something everyone at Coldwater seems to have forgotten exists." Before Reams could respond, the lights flickered, then stabilized. A moment later, her radio crackled. "Lieutenant, we've got a power fluctuation in Sector 3. Backup generators engaged." "Check it out," she ordered, "and find Kincaid, now." After the guards completed their count and lockdown D Block, a strange quiet settled over the cells. Inmates lay on their bunks listening to the unusual sounds of Coldwater under siege, distant shouts from protesters, the occasional crackle of guard radios, the hum of generators switching on and off as the power fluctuated. In his cell, Teach sat cross-legged on his bunk, eyes closed as if meditating. But his mind was active, calculating possibilities, anticipating movements. He'd studied Coldwater's infrastructure for years, memorizing blind spots in the surveillance system, mapping routes through the facility's maze-like corridors. He knew where Kincaid would go. The only question was when. A soft tap on the wall behind him, Morse code from the adjacent cell, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. Then, KINCAIDSEENLOWERTIER. Teach opened his eyes. It was happening sooner than expected. Across the block, inmates began a low, rhythmic tapping, the sound spreading from cell to cell like a heartbeat. It was a warning system they had developed over months, a way to communicate. During lockdowns, when verbal exchanges would alert the guards, The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Lights flickered again, then went out completely. For 3 long seconds, D-Block was plunged into darkness before the emergency lights activated, casting everything in a dim red glow. In that brief darkness, Teach heard the unmistakable sound of a cell door being unlocked. "What do you mean he's not in his cell?" Reams demanded, staring at the night guard who had just burst into her office. "D-Block count is 1 short," the guard reported breathlessly. "Ramsey's gone, and the surveillance system for that section just went offline." Reams grabbed her radio. "Full alert. All available personnel to D-Block immediately. We have a missing inmate during lockdown." As guards rushed to respond to the alert, no one noticed the solitary figure moving through the service corridor that connected the administrative wing to the lower levels. Kincaid, his access card still functioning despite his suspension, his face set in a mask of grim determination, his hand resting on the revolver concealed beneath his jacket. The confrontation Teach had been orchestrating for months was now inevitable, but it would happen on his terms, not Kincaid's. In the darkness of Coldwater's forgotten corners, the real reckoning was about to begin. The lower levels of Coldwater were the prison's oldest section, a labyrinth of narrow corridors, storage rooms, and abandoned cells dating back to the facility's construction in the 1940s. Most of it had been decommissioned decades ago, deemed too costly to maintain and too difficult to monitor effectively. But Teach knew these forgotten spaces intimately. For years he had studied the original blueprints, memorized the blind spots, and mapped escape routes through maintenance tunnels and abandoned wings. The Black Bloc had used these areas for clandestine meetings, for passing messages, for brief moments of privacy in a world designed to eliminate all autonomy. Now, as the red emergency lights cast long shadows across the concrete floor, Teach moved silently through the lower tier. He had minutes at most before Reams organized a proper search. Minutes to position himself for the confrontation he knew was coming. Behind him, the muffled sounds of chaos filtered down from the upper levels, guards shouting orders, radios crackling with static, the dull thud of security doors engaging. The staged power outage had worked perfectly, creating just enough confusion to allow him to slip away during the momentary darkness. Teach reached a junction where 3 corridors intersected and paused, listening. From the eastern passage came the soft but unmistakable sound of footsteps, deliberate, measured, familiar. Kincaid had taken the bait. "What do you mean, communications are down?" Lieutenant Reams demanded, her voice rising as she confronted the security officer in the control room. "Radio system's been compromised," the officer explained, typing frantically at his terminal. "We've got guards reporting in from the north and west wings, but nothing from the lower levels, and the surveillance feed for sectors 5 through 8 is completely offline." "How is that possible?" Reams snapped. "The backup systems also offline. Someone knew exactly which circuits to disable." Reams cursed under her breath. This was no coincidence. The communications blackout, the power fluctuations, Ramsey's disappearance, Kincaid's infiltration, it was all connected, all part of some elaborate scheme she was only beginning to understand. "Dispatch all available personnel to the lower levels," she ordered. "Full tactical gear, and find me Officer Merriman now." Duke Merriman was already moving, having slipped away from his assigned post during the initial confusion. He knew Coldwater's layout well enough to guess where Teach might go, and where Kincaid would follow. As he descended the rarely used stairwell to the lower tier, his hand rested on his service weapon. 3 months ago, he would never have imagined himself in this position, deliberately disobeying orders, risking his career and possibly his freedom to intervene in a conflict between a guard and an inmate. But 3 months at Coldwater had changed him. He'd seen enough to know that the titles of guard and inmate obscured a more fundamental distinction between those who abused power and those who suffered under it. The question was whether he could reach them in time. Kincaid moved with the confidence of a predator, his service revolver held low at his side. 20 years of patrolling Coldwater had taught him to navigate its darkest corners. He knew Ramsey was down here somewhere, could sense it with the same instinct that had helped him survive 2 decades in a profession where weakness meant death. The red emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish glow, turning the corridors into a nightmarish underworld. Distant alarms echoed faintly from the upper levels, but here in the depths of Coldwater, an unnatural quiet prevailed. "I know. You're here, Professor," Kincaid called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "No audience now, no cameras, just you and me, like it should have been from the beginning." He rounded a corner and entered a wider space, an old storage area with shelves of forgotten supplies lining the walls. And there, standing calmly in the center of the room, was Teach. "Sergeant Kincaid," Teach acknowledged, his voice level. "Or is it just Ray now, since you're no longer employed here?" Kincaid raised the revolver, aiming directly at Teach's chest. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Turning my own prison against me, making everyone think I'm the monster." "You did that yourself," Teach replied. "I just made sure people saw the truth." "The truth?" Kincaid barked a harsh laugh. "You wouldn't know truth if it beat you bloody. You people never do." "You people," Teach repeated softly. "Always comes back to that, doesn't it? You don't even see us as individuals, just a mass of interchangeable threats. How exhausting that must be, living with so much fear disguised as hatred." Kincaid's hand tightened on the gun. "Shut your mouth. I'm not here for one of your lectures." "Why are you here, Ray?" Teach asked, taking a small step forward despite the weapon trained on him. "To kill me? To prove I was right about you all along?" "I'm here for a confession," Kincaid snarled. "You're going to tell me exactly how you orchestrated this whole thing, the videos, the federal inspection, all of it. And then you're going to confess to attacking a guard during a lockdown. Is that your plan? Murder disguised as self-defense?" Teach shook his head. "Even now you're still playing by the old rules. But the game has changed." Kincaid moved. Closer, the gun now just feet from Teach's chest. "This isn't a game." "It's always been a game," Teach countered. "One rigged so that people like you always win and people like me always lose. The difference is I finally changed the rules." Something in Kincaid's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty beneath the rage. "You ruined my life," he said, his voice lower now. 20 years I gave to this place, 20 years keeping animals like you in line." "Animals," Teach echoed. "Is that what you tell yourself to make it easier? That we're less than human? That we deserve whatever happens to us?" "You have no idea what goes on in my head," Kincaid snapped. "I know exactly what goes on in your head, Ray," Teach replied, his voice softening with what almost sounded like pity. "I've studied men like you my whole life, as a scholar and as a black man in America. Men who need someone beneath them to feel tall, men who mistake cruelty for strength, men haunted by their own inadequacy." Kincaid's face contorted with fury. "You don't know me." "I know you better than you know yourself," Teach continued relentlessly. "I know about the nightmares that wake you at 3 a.m. I know about the bottle you keep in your truck to steady your nerves before each shift. I know how you flinch every time you drive past the spot where that inmate jumped you in the parking lot 12 years ago." Kincaid paled visibly. "How did you?" "Because that's my job. Knowing things. Understanding people. Seeing the patterns they can't see themselves." Teach took another small step forward. "I know you're not a monster, Ray. You're just a scared man who never learned another way to be." The gun in Kincaid's hand trembled slightly. "Back up," he warned. "I will shoot you." "No, you won't," Teach replied with quiet certainty. "Because deep down you know I'm right. This isn't about me, it never was. I'm just the mirror showing you what you've become." For a moment something crumbled in Kincaid's expression, a glimpse of the wounded, frightened man beneath the violent facade. But then his face hardened again and he stepped forward, pressing the barrel of the gun directly against Teach's chest. "You think words can save you?" he hissed. "You think I won't pull this trigger because you've psychoanalyzed me? This isn't one of your classrooms, Professor. This is Coldwater, my rules." "Not anymore," Teach replied calmly, even as the cold metal pressed against his sternum. "Coldwater doesn't belong to you anymore. Neither do I. On the upper levels, the lockdown was fracturing. What had begun as isolated disruptions, power fluctuations, communication failures, had evolved into something more organized. Inmates in multiple blocks began creating diversions, flooding toilets, faking medical emergencies, shouting about fires that didn't exist. The Black Bloc's network was executing Teach's contingency plan perfectly, stretching the already thin security staff beyond their limits. With each new crisis, more guards were pulled away from the search for Teach and Kincaid. In the control room, Lieutenant Reams struggled to maintain order as reports flooded in from all sectors. "I need backup in C block," crackled one radio. "Possible electrical fire in the kitchen," reported another. "Medical emergency in the West Wing." Reams slammed her hand on the console in frustration. "This is coordinated," she realized aloud. "They're creating distractions." "For what?" asked the security officer beside her. "To keep us from finding Ramsey," Reams replied grimly. "And Kincaid." She grabbed the facility-wide intercom microphone. "All inmates return to your cells immediately. Any inmate found outside their assigned area will face severe consequences. This is not a drill." But the chaos continued to spread, fueled by years of pent-up resentment and the sudden intoxicating sense that the balance of power was shifting. Coldwater was experiencing something it had never seen before, a peaceful but determined resistance that exploited the very control systems designed to suppress it. Duke reached the lower-level access door only to find it electronically sealed. Someone had overridden the security protocols from inside. He tried his access card, but the panel remained red. Cursing under his breath, he moved to the secondary entrance, a maintenance hatch that required manual override. As he worked to disengage the lock, he heard muffled voices echoing through. The ventilation system, Kincaid and Teach, their confrontation already underway. He worked faster, fingers slipping on the unfamiliar mechanism. Finally, the hatch swung open with a metallic groan. Duke drew his weapon and entered the dim corridor, following the voices toward their inevitable collision. "You think you've won something here?" Kincaid demanded, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You'll spend the rest of your life in a hole so deep they'll forget you exist." "Perhaps," Teach acknowledged, "but Coldwater will never be the same. The truth is out there now, about you, about this place, about the whole system. You can kill me, Ray, but you can't kill what I've started." "Watch me try," Kincaid snarled. But even as he prepared to fire, a new sound reached them, running footsteps approaching rapidly. Kincaid glanced toward the corridor, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Teach needed. In one fluid motion, he knocked Kincaid's arm upward just as the gun discharged, the bullet embedding itself in the concrete ceiling. They grappled for control of the weapon, their shadows grotesquely elongated by the red emergency lights. Kincaid was stronger, his muscles hardened by years of physical labor, but Teach was quicker, more calculating. They crashed against the storage shelves, sending forgotten supplies clattering to the floor. "Drop the weapon," Duke's voice rang out as he entered the room, his own gun raised. "Kincaid, it's over." But Kincaid was beyond reason now, his face contorted with the rage of a man who sees his entire world collapsing. He and Teach continued to struggle for the revolver, their bodies locked in a desperate dance. "I said drop it," Duke shouted. Again, moving closer, trying to find a clear shot that wouldn't risk hitting Teach. The fight carried them across the room, Kincaid driving Teach backward until they slammed into an electrical panel on the far wall. Sparks flew as ancient wiring short-circuited, and suddenly the emergency lights failed, plunging the room into total darkness. In that perfect blackness, 2 gunshots echoed in rapid succession, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the struggle like lightning in a storm. Then silence, heavy and complete. When Duke finally managed to activate his flashlight, the beam revealed Kincaid on his knees, blood spreading across his uniform shirt. Teach stood over him, the revolver now in his hand, pointed steadily at Kincaid's head. "Ramsey," Duke said cautiously, "put the gun down." Teach didn't move, his eyes locked with Kincaid's. In that moment, everything hung in the balance. Justice and vengeance, resistance and retribution, the past and the future. "Please." Duke added softer now. Don't give them a reason to bury you. Slowly, deliberately, Teach lowered the weapon and placed it on the floor. Call for medical, he told Duke, his voice steady despite the blood now visible on his own shoulder. He's hit. Kincaid stared up at Teach, bewilderment mixing with pain in his eyes. Why didn't you? He began, then stopped, unable to finish the question. Because I'm not you, Teach replied simply. I never was. As Duke radioed for help, the sounds of the prison in upheaval continued to filter down from above. Shouts and alarms and the heavy tread of tactical teams finally securing the facility. But in this forgotten corner of Coldwater, a different kind of resolution had been reached. The confrontation was over. The reckoning was just beginning. The official report described it as a security incident during facility lockdown. The medical records documented a gunshot wound to Sergeant Kincaid's upper chest, serious but not fatal, and a second wound to inmate Ramsey's left shoulder. The incident report, filed by Officer Dwight Merriman, stated that he had discovered the two men already injured, with no clear indication of who had fired first. What the report didn't mention was the conversation that had taken place in those first chaotic minutes after the shooting, as Duke applied pressure to Kincaid's wound while they waited for medical assistance. Tell them I attacked you, Teach had said quietly, his own blood seeping through his prison uniform. Tell them you found him wounded and me holding the gun. Duke had stared at him in confusion. That's not what happened. He came down here to kill you. I know. But if you tell the truth, nothing changes. Teach's eyes were clear despite the pain. They'll say I manipulated you, that you helped an inmate attack a guard. We both know how that story ends. So what's your plan? Duke had asked. Give them a version they can use, Teach explained. One that protects you while exposing what happened. You found us both injured. You don't know who shot first. You secured the weapon and called for help. They'll still blame you. They already do, Teach had replied with a small smile. But a guard with a clean record who tells a consistent story is more valuable to them than one who breaks ranks. They'll keep you close, trust you with information, and that's when you can really make a difference. Now, 24 hours later, Duke sat in a sterile conference room facing 3 Department of Justice investigators. The statement he'd given to Coldwater administration had been deliberately vague on certain details. The statement he was about to give the federal authorities would be anything but. Officer Merriman, began the lead investigator, a stern woman with salt and pepper hair. You're here voluntarily, and we appreciate your cooperation. We need to understand not just what happened during the lockdown, but the events leading up to it. Duke nodded. Where would you like me to start? From the beginning, the investigator replied. Everything you saw during your time at Coldwater, everything you heard and everything you did. Duke took a deep breath and began to speak. In the medical ward, Teach lay on a narrow bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his wrists secured to the railings with padded restraints, a security precaution ordered by Lieutenant Reams. Guards stood posted outside his door, and his visitors were restricted to medical personnel only. But isolation was nothing new to Teach. He had spent 7 years at Coldwater learning to find freedom in confinement, power in patience. The restraints on his wrists were nothing compared to the invisible chains that had begun to break throughout the prison system. Dr. Winters checked his bandages with professional efficiency, her face betraying nothing for the benefit of the guard observing through the door's small window. But as she leaned close to adjust his IV, she whispered, The feds have taken over. They're interviewing everyone. Reams is in a panic. And Kincaid? Teach asked quietly. Stable, under guard at County Hospital. She glanced toward the door, then added, They found 3 more videos yesterday, from years ago, other inmates. Teach nodded slightly. The Black Block's insurance policy, additional footage they had held back, to be released only if necessary. Jermaine? Recovering well. Asking about you. Dr. Winters straightened up, resuming her professional demeanor. The wound looks clean. No signs of infection. As she prepared to leave, Teach said, loud enough for the guard to hear, "Thank you, doctor. I appreciate your care." What passed unspoken between them was the deeper gratitude for her courage, her documentation, her willingness to stand against the system when so many others turned blind eyes. Lieutenant Reams sat alone in her office, shredding documents with methodical precision. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced through scenarios, calculating odds, assessing vulnerabilities. 23 years in corrections had taught her to prepare for every contingency, to leave no evidence that could be used against her. She had already deleted emails, clarified log entries, and coached key staff on their statements. But the federal investigation was moving faster than anticipated, with a thoroughness that suggested they had sources inside Coldwater beyond the videos. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. 2 DOJ agents stood in the doorway accompanied by state police officers. "Lieutenant Darla Reams?" one agent asked, though it wasn't really a question. "We have a warrant to seize all records related to inmate discipline, use of force incidents, and personnel complaints for the past 5 years. Reams kept her expression neutral despite the half-destroyed documents on her desk. "Of course, whatever you need. We'll also need access to your personal computer and email accounts," the agent continued, handing her a document. "And I'm required to inform you that a grand jury has been convened to investigate allegations of civil rights violations at this facility." "Am I being charged with something?" Reams asked, her voice steady despite the cold fear spreading through her chest. "Not at this time," the agent replied. "But I strongly suggest you retain counsel, Lieutenant. Things are moving quickly." After they left with boxes of files and her office computer, Reams sat motionless, staring at the warrant in her hand. The carefully constructed world she had maintained for decades, the delicate balance of power, discipline, and convenient blindness, was collapsing around her. She thought of Kincaid, lying in a hospital bed with a guard at his door. She thought of Granger, already distancing himself through carefully worded statements about being shocked by the alleged abuses. And she thought of Teach, who had somehow orchestrated all of this from within the very system designed to crush men like him. For the first time in her career, Lieutenant Reams felt something she had never expected to experience at Coldwater: defeat. In D Block, the atmosphere had shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Guards still patrolled, still gave orders, still maintained the appearance of absolute authority. But something fundamental had changed in the dynamic between keeper and kept. Inmates made eye contact more readily. They spoke to each other across racial lines that had previously divided them. And the Black Bloc, far from dissolving with Teach's absence, had evolved into something more inclusive. A coalition of the previously powerless, united by their shared experience of Coldwater's injustice. Brick had emerged as the interim leader, his physical presence complemented by an unexpected political savvy. He moved through the common area with deliberate calm, a word here, a nod there, maintaining the delicate balance between resistance and provocation. "Nothing stupid," he reminded a group of younger inmates who were discussing ways to capitalize on the administration's weakness. "Remember what Teach always says, patience over impulse." "But they're on the ropes," argued one young man. "Now's the time to push harder." "Now's the time to be smarter," Brick countered. "The eyes of the world are on Coldwater. Every move we make is being watched. We didn't come this far to blow it on some hothead move." As the group dispersed, Jefferson approached Brick with news from his infirmary rounds. "Jermaine's coming back to general population tomorrow," the old trustee reported. "Doc says he's healed enough." Brick nodded. "Good. The young blood could use some inspiration. How's he doing up there?" "Changed," Jefferson replied thoughtfully. "Quieter, more focused. Been reading those books Teach sent him." "That's how it starts," Brick said with a small smile. "That's how it started with all of us." The medical ward was quiet when Jermaine Holloway was finally discharged, his broken ribs healed enough for him to return to D Block. As an orderly helped him gather his few possessions, Dr. Winters entered with his discharge paperwork. "You'll need to continue the breathing exercises," she instructed, handing him a sheet of exercises. "And no yard basketball for at least another month." "Yes, ma'am," Jermaine replied, his voice more measured than the impulsive young man who had first arrived at Coldwater. "Have you seen him, Teach?" Dr. Winters glanced toward the door, ensuring they weren't overheard. "Briefly, he's stable, but isolated. They're keeping him in administrative segregation pending the investigation." Jermaine nodded, unsurprised. "They think that'll stop what he started." "Will it?" she asked. A small smile touched Jermaine's lips. "You can lock up a man. You can't lock up an idea." He paused, then added, "Teach helped me see that. He could have been bitter, hard. Instead, he built something. That's real power." As an escort arrived to return him to D Block, Jermaine stood a little straighter, his eyes clearer, his purpose more defined than when he'd arrived at Coldwater with nothing but rage and fear to sustain him. In the warden's office, no longer occupied by Granger, who had resigned rather than face termination, Duke sat across from the interim federal administrator assigned to oversee Coldwater during the transition. His testimony to the DOJ had been comprehensive and damning, providing the documentation they needed to expand their investigation beyond Kincaid to the entire administrative structure. "Officer Merriman," the administrator began, "your cooperation has been invaluable. The department is prepared to offer you a position on the transition team, helping to implement new protocols while ensuring continuity of basic operations." Duke considered the offer carefully. "What about the inmates who helped expose the abuses, particularly Ramsey?" "That's complicated," the administrator admitted. "Officially, Ramsey violated numerous regulations during the lockdown incident. But given the circumstances and his cooperation since, we're reviewing options that take his actions into account." "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning no additional charges. Possible transfer to a lower security facility once the investigation concludes." The administrator leaned forward. "Look, Merriman, I understand your concern. But remember, these men are still convicted felons. Ramsey is serving life for murder. A conviction many believe was racially motivated." Duke pointed out. "That's not my department," the administrator replied, his tone cooling. "My job is to ensure Coldwater operates according to federal guidelines moving forward. I need to know if you're on board with that mission." Duke thought of Teach's advice, to remain inside the system, to work for change from a position of access rather than opposition. "I'm on board," he said finally. "But I want your assurance that the reforms will be real, not just for show until the media attention dies down." "You have my word," the administrator promised. "This isn't a quick fix. The DOJ is committed to long-term oversight." As Duke left the office, he wondered if he had made the right choice, if working within a broken system truly offered more hope than fighting it from the outside. But he thought of what Teach had accomplished from within the most restrictive environment imaginable, and his resolve strengthened. Sometimes the most radical act was to stay and bear witness. 1 month after the lockdown incident, Teach sat in a small interview room, his injured shoulder still tender but healing well. Across from him sat a DOJ investigator and a representative from the governor's office, his first official meeting since the shooting. "Mr. Ramsey," began the investigator, "your actions during your time at Coldwater have placed us in a unique position. The evidence you helped gather has led to indictments against former Sergeant Kincaid, Lieutenant Reams, and Warden Granger on multiple civil rights violations." "I'm aware," Teach replied calmly. "What you may not be aware of is that your case has garnered significant attention from advocacy groups and legal observers. There are growing calls to review your original conviction." Teach's expression remained neutral, though a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, showed briefly in his eyes. "I've maintained my innocence for 7 years." "The governor's office is considering all options," the representative interjected, "including the possibility of commutation, given your role in exposing institutional abuses." "I appreciate that," Teach said carefully. But I'm more concerned about ensuring the changes at Coldwater extend beyond a few high-profile terminations. That's actually why we're here, the investigator explained. We're establishing an inmate advisory council to work with the new administration on implementing reforms. Given your influence, we'd like you to participate. Teach allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, legitimacy for the very network they had tried to dismantle. I would be honored, he replied, on one condition. Which is? Jermaine Holloway joins the council too. Teach met their gaze steadily. The future of Coldwater belongs to the young men like him. They need a voice in shaping it. The officials exchanged glances, then nodded. We can arrange that. As they concluded the meeting, the investigator asked one final question. The shooting, Mr. Ramsey. There are still unanswered questions about what really happened in that room. Teach considered his response carefully. Sometimes the truth serves justice better than perfect accuracy, he said finally. What matters is that no one died that day, and the system that allowed such a confrontation to occur is finally being examined. It wasn't the answer they wanted, but they accepted it nonetheless. Some mysteries would remain part of Coldwater's legacy, a reminder that truth often existed in the spaces between official records. In the visitation room of County Hospital, Raymond Kincaid sat propped up in bed, still connected to monitors, a police officer stationed discreetly by the door. His lawyer had just left after delivering the news. The grand jury had returned indictments on 27 separate counts. The career he had built, the power he had wielded, the identity he had constructed, all of it was gone, replaced by the sterile reality of hospital rooms and court dates, and the growing certainty of years behind bars. The irony wasn't lost on him. He would become what he had spent decades containing, controlling, punishing. He would experience from the inside the system he had enforced from without. As evening fell, casting long shadows across his hospital room, Kincaid closed his eyes and saw again the moment in the darkness when Teach had held the gun to his head, the moment when everything had balanced on a knife's edge between vengeance and mercy. Why didn't you do it? He had asked in the ambulance later when pain and blood loss had stripped away his defenses. Because killing you wouldn't change the system, Teach had replied simply, and the system was always the real enemy. Now facing the ruins of his life, Kincaid began to understand what Teach had meant. He had never been the master of Coldwater, only its most visible instrument. The real power had always resided in the structures that enabled men like him, that rewarded cruelty disguised as order, that transformed fear into policy. And for the first time in 20 years, Ray Kincaid felt the weight of accountability pressing down on him, heavier than any prison sentence, more binding than any restraint. As night fell over Coldwater, a new rhythm settled over the facility. Federal monitors walked the corridors alongside regular guards. Cameras that had conveniently malfunctioned for years now operated under independent oversight. Incident reports were reviewed by outside observers. Small changes, perhaps, but the beginning of something profound. In D Block, Jermaine sat on his bunk, a copy of Baldwin's The Fire Next Time open on his lap. The same book Teach had been reading the day they first spoke. Around him, inmates moved with a different energy, their conversations peppered with words like counsel and representation and rights. Brick paused by his cell. You ready for tomorrow? First meeting of the advisory council. Jermaine nodded, closing the book carefully. Teach prepared me. Said my job is to listen more, then talk at first. Smart man, Brick agreed. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. Do you think they'll ever let him out? Jermaine asked quietly. Review his case like they're saying? Brick considered the question. I don't know. But that was never what this was about for him. He didn't fight to get out of Coldwater. He fought to change it from within. As the lights dimmed for evening count, Jermaine thought about the journey that had brought him here, from angry young gang member to student of resistance, from victim to voice. The path had been brutal, marked with blood and pain, but also with unexpected grace and profound awakening. Coldwater had been designed to break men like him. Instead, it had become the crucible in which a different kind of strength was forged. Not the strength of domination that Kincaid had embodied, but the strength of collective resistance, of dignity preserved against all odds. The prison still stood. The walls remained. But something essential had shifted within those walls, a turning so fundamental that it could never be undone. And in cells throughout Coldwater, men once defined only by their confinement began to imagine different possibilities, not just for themselves, but for the system that had sought to contain not just their bodies, but their very humanity. The turning had begun. What would follow remained to be written. 6 months after the lockdown, autumn painted the Mississippi countryside in gold and crimson. Beyond Coldwater's high concrete walls, leaves drifted from ancient oaks, a stark contrast to the unchanging gray monotony within. Yet even Coldwater had changed, in ways both visible and invisible. Federal oversight had transformed daily operations. New guards moved through the corridors alongside veterans who had survived the purge. Cameras functioned without convenient blind spots. Small changes, perhaps, but revolutionary in a place where impunity had once been the only law that mattered. In the prison yard, Teach walked his customary path, his left arm hanging slightly lower than his right, a permanent reminder of that night in the darkness. Inmates nodded respectfully as he passed, some reaching out to touch his shoulder. Small gestures of connection in a world designed to sever all human bonds. "Professor." Brick fell into step beside him. Verdict came in. "Guilty?" "All counts," Brick confirmed. 25 years. No possibility of parole until he's served at least 15. They walked in silence for a moment, absorbing the symmetry of it all. Kincaid would now serve time in the same system he had corrupted for decades. "Justice," Brick said finally, testing the word as if it were a foreign language. "Of a kind," Teach agreed. "But justice isn't just punishment for past wrongs, it's creating structures that prevent future ones." As they completed their circuit, Jermaine approached, a stack of books balanced carefully in his arms. At 21, he carried himself with newfound confidence, the angry boy who had arrived at Coldwater now transformed into a young man with purpose. "Teach," he called. "I've got the materials for today's class. First session starts at 10. "I'll be there," Teach promised. "How many signed up?" 12, Jermaine reported proudly. 8 from D Block, 4 from C. Dr. Richards approved all the books, and Warden Thompson allocated the classroom for twice-weekly sessions. "Good work," Teach told him. "This literacy program is just the beginning. Education is how we build something lasting here." The federal courthouse in Jackson hummed with tense energy as Raymond Kincaid rose to receive his sentence. Gone was the crisp uniform and commanding presence. In their place stood a diminished figure in an ill-fitting suit, his face etched with the lines of a man watching his life's foundation crumble. "I did my job," he stated flatly. "I maintained order in a place most of society doesn't want to think about. If my methods crossed lines, it's because the state put me in an impossible position." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Kincaid, this court has reviewed extensive evidence of abuses that went far beyond maintaining order. You didn't merely cross lines, you obliterated them. The trust placed in corrections officers is sacred precisely because of the power imbalance you described." As Kincaid was led away in handcuffs, his eyes betrayed no remorse, only a smoldering resentment, as if the world had suddenly changed its rules without informing him. In many ways, it had. In the administrative wing, Duke Merriman cleared out his desk, placing personal items into a cardboard box. After 6 months on the DOJ transition team, his reassignment had finally come through. A position at the Federal Training Center, developing new protocols for correctional officers. "Sure I can't change your mind, Merriman?" Warden Thompson asked from the doorway. "We need good officers here more than ever." Duke shook his head. "I think I can do more good training the next generation than staying here." As he carried his box toward the exit, Duke made one final detour to the library, where Teach was organizing materials for the afternoon's class. "So it's official," Teach said, noting the box. "You're leaving us." "New assignment," Duke confirmed. "Training center in Atlanta, teaching new COs how not to become Kincaid." "Important work," Teach acknowledged, "though I'll miss our philosophical debates." Duke reached into his box and withdrew a book, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. "Thought you might appreciate this. It helped me understand, well, a lot of things." "Thank you. I'll add it to our curriculum." "There's something else," Duke added. "I spoke with some contacts at the Innocence Project about your case. They're interested, Teach. They think there might be grounds for review." A complex emotion passed across Teach's face, hope tempered by caution. "I've been down that road before. The system doesn't readily admit its mistakes." "This time might be different," Duke insisted. "With everything that's happened, the spotlight on Coldwater, perhaps," Teach conceded. "But my freedom isn't the only goal worth pursuing. What we're building here matters regardless of where I reside." They shook hands firmly, a gesture between equals rather than guard and inmate. "Remember what you learned here," Teach said. "Every day," Duke promised. "Every single day." The classroom, once a storage room, now converted with simple desks and a whiteboard, filled gradually as inmates arrived for the literacy program. Jermaine stood at the front, arranging materials with careful precision. "Nervous?" Teach asked. "A little," Jermaine admitted. "It's my first time leading the class alone." "You're ready," Teach assured him. "Remember, most of these men haven't had anyone believe in their intellectual potential before. That belief is sometimes the most important thing you can offer." As inmates settled into their seats, a diverse group spanning ages, backgrounds, and racial lines, Jermaine took a deep breath. "Welcome to Foundations of Literacy," he began, his voice gaining confidence. "My name is Jermaine Holloway. Some of you know me as Lil Smoke, but in this classroom, we're all just students together." From the back, Teach watched with quiet pride as Jermaine introduced the curriculum he had helped develop, a program combining basic literacy with critical thinking and civil rights history. "We'll start with something simple but powerful," Jermaine continued, writing on the board. "The right to read is the right to think freely." Can anyone tell me who said that? As the class engaged with growing enthusiasm, Teach slipped out. Quietly. Jermaine didn't need him there anymore. He had found his own voice, his own purpose. In the corridor, Teach encountered Warden Thompson with a young man he didn't recognize. African American, perhaps 25, wearing the uniform of a new corrections officer. "Mr. Ramsey," Thompson greeted him. "This is Officer James Washington, just transferred from the academy. He'll be assigned to D Block starting tomorrow." The young officer extended his hand somewhat nervously. "Sir, I've heard a lot about you. All terrifying, I'm sure," Teach replied with a small smile. "And it's just Ramsey or Teach if you prefer. Sir has troubling connotations in a place like this." "Officer Washington has specifically requested D Block," Thompson explained. "He's interested in our educational initiatives." Teach studied the young officer with interest. "Walk with me to the yard. Let's talk about what serving in D Block really means." Outside, the yard was quiet in the afternoon sun. Teach led Washington to a bench with a clear view of both the prison buildings and the distant tree line beyond the walls. "Why did you request D Block specifically?" Teach asked. Washington hesitated, then answered honestly. "I grew up in Jackson. My older brother was incarcerated when I was 12. Not here, but a similar facility. The letters he wrote home, they changed how I saw the system. I wanted to be part of something different." "A noble intention," Teach acknowledged. "But good intentions without clear principles can still cause harm. Before you set foot in D Block, you need to understand what we've built there." For the next hour, Teach outlined the unwritten constitution that now governed D Block, the carefully balanced relationship between security and dignity, the mechanisms for addressing grievances, the expectations of both officers and inmates. There's room for authority without abuse, Teach explained, for discipline without dehumanization. The men in D Block don't expect freedom from consequences, only freedom from cruelty. As their conversation concluded, Washington asked, "They offered you a transfer, didn't they? To a lower security facility? Why stay here?" Teach gazed across the yard, where men moved through their daily routines, men whose humanity had so often been denied in the name of security or convenience or simple indifference. "Because transformation isn't an event, it's a process," he answered. "What we've started here remains fragile. It needs tending, like any living thing." He turned to face the young officer directly. "And because someone once told me that true, change comes from within. I believed it then. I still do." The following morning, Kincaid began processing into the state penitentiary system he had once helped administer. His personal effects were inventoried, his civilian clothes exchanged for a prison uniform, his identity reduced to a number. In his cell, a space smaller than his former office at Coldwater, the reality of his new existence began to penetrate the armor of denial he had constructed. 25 years, perhaps 15 with good behavior. By then he would be an old man, a footnote in a cautionary tale about corruption and abuse of power. As night fell and the lights dimmed, Raymond Kincaid lay in darkness, much like the darkness of that storage room 6 months earlier. Only now the gun was no longer in his hand, the power was no longer his to wield, and the mercy that had spared his life seemed, in retrospect, a far more profound punishment than a bullet would have been. His final thought before sleep claimed him was of Teach's words in the ambulance. The system was always the real enemy. Only now, too late, did he begin to understand what that meant. 3 days later, as autumn deepened toward winter, Teach sat in the visitor's room across from an attorney from the Innocence Project, a young woman with determined eyes and a bulging case file. "The DNA evidence was never properly examined," she explained, "and 3 witnesses have recanted their testimony, claiming police pressure. We believe there are grounds for a complete review." "How long?" Teach asked simply. "If we file next month, maybe a year until the initial hearing. Another year if it proceeds to review. Nothing about this process is quick, Mr. Ramsey. Time is one resource I've learned to manage efficiently. There's something else," the attorney added. "Governor Mitchell is following your case personally. With the media attention on Coldwater reforms, there's talk of commutation if the legal process stalls." After she left, Teach remained in the visiting room, watching families reconnect across carefully monitored tables. The possibility of freedom, real freedom, not just the relative autonomy he had carved out within Coldwater's walls, settled into his consciousness like a seed taking root. But as he returned to D Block, where Jermaine was organizing the next day's literacy materials, and Brick was mentoring younger inmates, Teach recognized that freedom would mean leaving behind the community they had built together, the small democracy forged through struggle and sacrifice. Spring arrived at Coldwater with surprising gentleness, coaxing green shoots from the small garden plot the administration had approved as part of the rehabilitation initiatives. Inmates who had once been rivals worked side by side, building something living in a place designed for spiritual death. In the yard, Teach and Jermaine discussed the expansion of educational programs to include GED preparation and possibly community college credits. "The classroom's too small now," Jermaine reported. 28 students last session, we had to turn people away." As they rounded the corner, they noticed a new arrival at the gate. A young black woman in business attire, escorted by Officer Washington. "Who's that?" Jermaine asked, squinting against the morning sun. Teach studied the visitor, recognition dawning slowly. "If I'm not mistaken, that's our new teacher. The one Warden Thompson mentioned was coming from the community college." As the visitor drew closer, Jermaine's eyes widened. "Teach, that looks like Dr. Angela Davis," Teach confirmed, a rare smile spreading across his face. Apparently, Warden Thompson took our curriculum suggestions seriously. The legendary activist approached them, extending her hand first to Teach. "Professor Ramsey, I've been following your work here. When the warden asked me to guest lecture in your program, I couldn't refuse. This is an unexpected honor. The honor is mine, she corrected. What you and these men have built here, a genuine community of learning within these walls. It's exactly what I've advocated for decades. As they walked toward the education building, she added, I've also spoken with the Innocence Project about your case. They're making progress. Teach nodded, acknowledging without letting it distract from the moment. Today, let's focus on the men who will be in your classroom. Their education is the immediate priority. The classroom was filled beyond capacity, inmates having heard through Coldwater's efficient grapevine about the special guest. Teach stood at the back as Dr. Davis was introduced by Jermaine, who managed the task with impressive poise. This, he thought, was what victory looked like. Not dramatic confrontations or public vindication, though those mattered too. But this quiet rebuilding of human dignity, this restoration of intellectual curiosity in men, the system had written off as nothing more than problems to be contained. Outside the classroom window, beyond the high walls and razor wire, the Mississippi, spring continued its ancient ritual of renewal. Within those walls, a different kind of renewal was underway, slower, more fragile, but no less profound. Coldwater still stood. Its walls remained intact. But what lived within those walls had fundamentally changed. New growth had found purchase in the most barren soil, nurtured by the most unlikely gardeners. As Teach finally took his seat to listen, he caught Jermaine's eye across the room. The young man nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The journey wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be. But the direction had changed, and with it, the possibility of a different future had taken root. Not just for Coldwater, but for all the Coldwaters that still operated in shadows across the nation. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.